Hoodoo, the Akan term undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. Undu, to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication, divination. Cast, the Akan term guasi, to project, to throw, release. Cast, to form into a mold, to solidify. Hoodoo cast, to project our sacred mold of Akan ancestral religion in North America, the solidification of our identity, our ritual culture of medicine for healing and defense, our ritual culture of spirit communication for knowledge and application. Hoodoo cast, for the preservation of our people and the eradication of our enemies.
Yechimo Afura Kanu Afurai Kaitnut, Africa's Black People. We are once again episode 3 of Hoodoo Cast, the podcast for authentic Hoodoo, Akan Ancestral Religion in North America. So today we are in Washington, D.C., and we are visiting with our sister, Nijma Esad. Nijma is actually originally from Chicago, just as I am. We both independently moved here a number of years back to D.C., but we are here in D.C. because we want to talk about the Okraguare. Now, in the Akan language, Okra, as well as Okra, are the male and female terms for soul, divine consciousness, the deity that dwells in the head region. So your spiritual head is the Okra for males, Okra or Okrawa for females. Guare means to wash or cleanse. So in the Akan tradition, Okraguare means to cleanse or wash the Okra, the soul, the divine consciousness. Now the difference between what Europeans and Eurasians define soul in comparison to Afurakani people, African Black people, no matter what group, ethnic group you find on the continent and where we have migrated to or were forced to migrate to, the soul, the divine consciousness, is specifically a divinity. It's a male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female, that takes up residence in the head region. And just like your physical body has an entity in the head region that regulates all functions in the physical body, which is the brain, of course, your spirit body, which is the Sum Sum, as we call it in Akan, has a radiant force in the head region, which is the Okra, the soul, divine consciousness. It is a divinity that carries your divine function and regulates everything that should happen within your spirit body, your function in creation. And as we always say in the cosmology, we are like cells within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. So your liver cells serve their parent divinity, the liver. When they serve their parent divinity, the liver, they serve you, the Supreme Being, at the same time. Your heart cells support heart functions, their parent deity. When they serve their parent deity, they serve you at the same time. We are cells, plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afurakadi, African Black human life. We are cells within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. As we call Nyame Wa Nyame in the Akan tradition. In Yoruba, for example, that's Olorun and Olokun, the great father and great mother, and it's Mawu and Lisa, the great mother and great father, and Vodun and so forth. But the great mother and great father, Supreme Being, we are cells within that great divine body. And since we're children of specific organs within that great divine body, children of specific abosom, which are deities, as we call them in the Akan tradition, they're called Orisha in the Yoruba tradition, Vodou in the Ewe tradition. The deities or the forces in nature that animate the sun, moon, planets, stars, oceans, rivers, atmosphere, fire, water, and so forth. These spirits that animate the different features of creation, they are the organs within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. They regulate order within creation, the body of the Supreme Being. Just like your organs and glands are the quote-unquote deities, the children of your great body, they regulate order in your body. And they give birth to cells, which are us, plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afurakani, African Black human life, and Afurakani, African Black human life only. And the reason why that cosmological breakdown is important is because when we talk about the Okra, your function in the world as a cell, what is your function to execute in the world, that is written into your Okra. Just like the blueprint of everything that should happen in your body is written in the brain. So when we cleanse the head, the spiritual head, we engage the ritual process of cleansing the spiritual head, we get away all of that debris, that emotional, energetic debris, certain conditionings that we have picked up or suppressed and so forth that will block our understanding and perception of our function. So that's no matter what group you're talking about, Akan, Yoruba, Ewe, Basa, Fula, no matter what group you're talking about, we all have some approach to cleansing the Okra. In the Hoodoo tradition, which is the Akan tradition in North America, we do the same kind of approach, of course, that we learned from our ancestresses and ancestors, our Akan ancestresses and ancestors that were forced into the Western Hemisphere in the so-called 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and so forth. So, Okraguare, the soul-washing ritual, it is rooted in Akan cosmology, and therefore it is a Hoodoo approach to cleansing the head. It's based on the divinity that governs the head, and there's a specific means by which Akan people approach that system. But first, I just want to say Yerase. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for considering me someone worthy of sitting next to you in this podcast.
Okay, you're being professional right now. You're being professional. I'm gonna be professional too. No, but I appreciate that. So, and we've known each other for years, over a decade and so forth. Coming from Chicago, coming to DC and so forth. So, I wanted to talk to Nijma because she's very prolific. She has a master's degree in library and information science. She also has a master's degree in inner city studies. She's a line producer and narrator for an upcoming documentary, which is the Take the Village, Trauma, Triggered, and Truth. And what it's talking about is mental health in the Black community in the United States, different approaches to mental health, including different therapeutic interventions that should be introduced with regard to ancestral spirituality and certain modalities. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when we think about mental health, especially as it relates to people of African descent, our experiences here in all colonized places are a bit more egregious. So when you see a Black person on the street who seems agitated or seems unsettled, you can't just say like, oh, they're crazy. Right. Like there's a history behind that and there's a pain attached to it. And so what we want to address in this documentary, It Takes a Village, Trauma, Triggered, Truth, is just it's not even a trifecta. Like I feel like there are about 5 different pieces we talk about. We talk about environment. We talk about access to healthy food. We talk about religion, the role that religion plays. Most African American people, especially here in America, they identify as Christians. And there's the theory or this ideology in Christianity that if there's something wrong, if you feel overwhelmed, you're supposed to pray it away. Like for so many years, there's been like a push away from therapy. Like if God can't fix it, it doesn't need to be fixed, right? And so if you're dealing with trauma in your home, if you're dealing with sexual deviance from family members and you go to church and they don't want to address it, like things have to be hushed and pushed under the rug, then what do you turn to when you feel like there's no one supporting you? Right. And also sometimes like the people in your family, they're too close to the situation. So you do need some outside supports. You do need therapy. You do need just someone who doesn't necessarily have that same vested interest in this situation to be able to kind of guide you somewhere else. But even in that, and we've talked about that, like you have to be careful because there are a lot of predators in so many different places who can make a situation even worse.
Right. And that's, we're going to get to that because it happens in Ancestral Religious, pseudo-Ancestral Religious circles as well. And I appreciate you for recommending me for the documentary as well. So I have a little segment in that. So it's a number of different people, social workers, therapists.
Nutritionists, we have an urban planner, just to talk about I just read an article recently about Levittown, and in the making of Levittown, it was explicitly saying that, you know, there were only white people who could live here. So if there are only white people who could live here, there is an urbanization that happens that is pushing other people in only specific places. Like, this is what's deemed good enough for you to stay in, but it lacks the basic necessities to provide a healthy life.
Exactly. And that's, you know, and we talked about this before, certain African-centered psychologists recognized, you know, decades ago, they would go get their degrees, study Maslow and Skinner and Freud and Jung and Rogers and all these different people. They realized that this conventional or Eurocentric approach is not suited for our people, especially with regard to, sometimes we have unresolved ancestral issues. You have a deceased ancestor or ancestress whose spirit is still hanging around the person, and that's what's causing the, you know, the majority of the problems.
Yeah.
If you engage ritually and help that person to move to the ancestral realm, to join the other community of ancestresses and ancestors instead of them being earthbound and like a transient person, like a homeless person sitting by a bridge, and every time people walk by, they lash out because they're, you know, in pain.
But my question is, like, if you don't have that information, if you don't
Right.
have that knowledge, and you're just kind of feel this presence over you, how do you purge it? Like, what can you do to kind of usher it along if you don't have that information and that knowledge base?
And that's why the film is important. And certain African-centered psychologists, they recognize that, and they started trying to, you know, develop an African-centered approach to psychology, and you see people writing about that over the past, you know, number of decades. And the reality is, the first priests and priestesses and elders and eldresses, we were the first therapists. Even the term therapy comes from Cherapit in ancient Kemet, which is a title of a priest or priestess. So we've always had that. We've always had honored eldresses and eldresses and elders who are the counselors. You have the priests and priestesses like Abosomfo and Okomfo and Odwirafo and so forth, who are the ones who provide the medicine as well as the, you know, ritual work and so forth. These were so-called psychiatrists who procure that medicine in a holistic fashion. So it's just, you know, we're circling back to what we need to get to. But now, since you mentioned that, you mentioned like the historic origin of the Levittown and so forth. Nijma is also a historian, a true historian, archivist. So I sent, and we're going to put this in the link, the link in the, you know, for the description for the podcast. So you'll see different ads. Hoodoo Cast podcast. So you'll see different ads. For example, the South Carolina Gazette in the so-called 1700s. So they'll have ads for quote-unquote slave auctions or ads in the paper when somebody ran away from enslavement and so forth. There was a large percentage of Akan people who were forced into South Carolina directly from the continent, as well as in Richmond and North Carolina and so forth. But when you look, for example, a good example is the South Carolina Gazette. They have all these different archives of, you know, people who were enslaved, auctions. You know, we're selling this Negro or this bed wench and so forth with this amount of money, or you can get them on credit, all these different things. But what's very important is you'll see the different names, and sometimes they have English names, of course, sometimes they have names from Gambia and so forth, but then you'll see Akan, what we call Akan Kradin, or soul names. So my Kradin or soul name is Kwesi, not just because I was born on Sunday, but the divinity that governs the sun, the major divinity that governs the sun that operates through that, you know, solar orb. I was assigned to that divinity pre-incarnation, so therefore I was sent into the world to be born on his day to indicate to the community that I carry that energy into the world. If somebody is born on Monday, like Nijma, and the Kradin is Ajua, that means she was assigned to the divinity Nana Ajua, that female abosom pre-incarnation. So when she came into her mother's womb, she came into the womb to carry that Ajua energy into the world. And Ajua, who is all set in ancient Kemet, she's Ajua and Akan. She made sure that she would be born on her day to indicate to the community who she was assigned to. So that's directly related to the Okraguare, the soul washing ceremony. But when you see, for example, as a historian, as a true historian, you see slave auction ads and so forth like that, but you'll see all these different Akan names. What does that evoke for you?
So I find it interesting. Like we've talked about hoodoo and we've talked about traditional African religions, right? And it's always fascinating to me that you've made that connection that hoodoo is just an American version of the Akan religion. And so in thinking about that, like some of the questions that I have is when we think about, like, for so long, history has told us that we have no culture,
right,
and we have no history, and we had no value prior to our being used as chattel. And so when I see names, and even to this day, like there's so many, you run into so many people who have Kwesi or Adwa or Afua or Yao as names, and they probably don't even know on a surface level why their parents named them that. Their parents may not even know that, but that's something that we hold in our cry. Like that's information that we've carried down with us, and it's just so much a part of who we are intrinsically that it just naturally comes out. On my Instagram page, and I can't remember this young man's name, but when I was working as a librarian for the DC Public Library, I had to go to a high school, and we used to do programs showing teen parents how to read to their children, because there's this idea that children who start kindergarten with 4,500 words, they're usually the children of college educated parents. And parents who didn't go to college, their children typically start with 500 words. So you're starting children in kindergarten with a 4,000 word difference, right? So we would go into the communities, we would go into high schools that had daycares, and we would talk to teen parents and teach them how to read to their children and why it was important. But anyway, it was this young man, and I cannot remember what his son's name was, but it just touched me, and I looked it up, and it meant young lion. Right? And he didn't even know that. He was like, I just thought it was a dope name.
Right.
But it was in him, and the spirit told him to name his son, and I bet you that young man is going to be doing amazing things just because he has that name to kind of attach to him and guide him through life.
Definitely. When we just instinctively, like when you said the spirit told him to do that, when men and women instinctively are drawn to a specific configuration of sound vibrations that comprise a certain name, they're like, this is the name. They don't know the details, they don't know the definition, but sometimes it's an ancestral spirit, sometimes it's the divinity that governs the head, but they're like, they direct them to the right collection of sound vibrations that every time they hear it, every time they speak it, every time they contemplate it, that collection of sound vibrations, when they ingest that, for them, it recalibrates their spirit back to their function.
Yeah.
That's why names like McGillicuddy and Johnson and James, that's a set of dissonant, discordant vibrations that once we ingest it, it creates dissonance within us. It doesn't realign us with our function. So that's why the first thing they did was take the names away.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when we see these true historical documents, and you see Kwesi and Kwame and Adwa, a slave named Kwesi or Kwame and Adwa, they're going to be sold at November 13th, and come out and you can get them on credit and all this other stuff. And they literally have that in the documents. They have credit, options like PayPal, But what it's showing is that Akan people were here. Yeah. Akan people were still embracing, their culture. But also, if you say, I'm a Kwabena or I'm an Adwa, when they were forced on the plantation, and at some point when they were quiet, they were accustomed to, on the day of the week that they were born, they would get some water, cleanse their head, recalibrate themselves, and here they would plan for revolution, resolution, and so forth. So the Okraguare continued. So now every group on the continent has their own version of cleansing the head, but for us, it's dealing with the divinity that governs the day we were born and so forth. We engage in a specific ritual process, and just like we have shown that mojo comes from the Akan term moja, the jack or jack ball comes from the Akan term ja, which is a patriclan talisman for the patriclan divinity. The mojo is a matriclan talisman for the matriclan divinity. The term haint, spirit, comes from the hinti and Akan and kanche, to utter incantations to bring the spirits forward is the origin of the term conjure. And, hoodoo comes from undu and Akan and so forth. So every feature of the hoodoo tradition, you look at the names and the functions and what these ritual implements are and ritual invocations are, you can trace them all to the Akan tradition, and they're multifaceted and interconnected. And that's the same with the specific approach that Akan people use to cleanse their head. Yoruba people cleanse their orrery. They have a specific means by which they do that. If a Yoruba person was enslaved over here, they would use their approach. But if an Akan person was enslaved over here, they would go and engage the Okraguare. So there was you talked about the mental health aspect, and you working with different people, and you interviewing these different people. You've been interfacing with people who are therapists and so forth. You know that particular approach, but then you've also done ritual as well, and you've engaged the Okraguare process. So what would you say? What's the contrast between the two? What's the difference?
So I will say, for me, I think the first time we did the ritual cleansing on my soul day was maybe like 4 years ago. And I know that it was such a stressful time. I felt so lost. I felt like I was kind of at a crossroads in my life. And I'm just trying to figure out what is happening. Like, I just felt so disconnected and so out of control in so many aspects of my life. And I know that you told me that I think my Earth Day must have been on a Thursday. And so you said the following Monday is when we would go.
Right.
To the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, I think you really, and you asked me if I had ever done a soul cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, nah, I haven't. And you were like, I think that that's what you need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember you told me, you came to pick me up and you were like, nah, you have to wear white. So I had to go back and change. I was like, I don't have anything white. I'll figure it out. But, and we went to, what is it, Sligo Creek? I think that was probably the closest kind of body of water that we had in the area.
Right.
And I remember pulling up into the gravel parking lot, and immediately the heaviness started to lift. And there were a lot of people around, like it wasn't secluded, but just being there and understanding what I was about to do, and even the act of taking off my shoes so I could walk on the rocks into the creek and sit down in this cold water, like all of that, I just felt like a shedding. I felt the heaviness and all of life's ailments just kind of releasing. And then once I finally I didn't submerge myself, but once I finally sat down in the creek, I didn't even hear any other sounds.
Right.
Like everything else kind of disappeared, and it was just me kind of setting my intentions and speaking to my deity.
Right. And that's what things that are busy, and once you get into an area where you can kind of be slightly secluded in nature, the plant life, the mineral life, the water and so forth begins to pull some of that emotional and discordant energy debris off of you just by stepping into the space.
Yeah.
And even though the gravel, was right there, there's a little playground right here, it's only a few feet away from the creek. But as soon as you cross that barrier, it seems like you step into a different world.
I like the colors were different. Like the sun was shinier. It was just it was a great experience. And then just the aspect of bringing an offering, like coming with some fruit, coming with something that I can give to this water spirit to help to cleanse me and to thank them for the process.
Mm-hmm. And that's like the way we consistently cleanse ourselves. We do that in a major way once a year, but also in our Akan tradition once a week on your soul day, the day that you came into the world. We do a head cleansing, typically at home at the shrine, but you can do it outside as well. One thing you brought up, which we we'll post this on social media once a year because some people just don't know. The day begins at sunrise. So just like the year begins, it doesn't begin, at midnight, at the dead of winter, the darkest time of the year, the coldest time of the year. That's a caveman, New Year. It's dark, cold, icy, everything's dead. They run out the cave and the ice and say Happy New Year. But that's not us. Same thing with the dead. The darkest time of the night, midnight, that's the middle of the night.
Right.
So when you look at ancient Kemetic, the sun rises, and Ra's in the boat of the sun, and Ra'et is in the boat of the sun at sunrise and so forth, and that's the beginning of the 12 hours of the day. Then he gets into the night boat, and it's the 12 hours of the night, and Ra'et becomes Afurat as well. The same thing in the Akan tradition. Sunrise is the beginning of the day. So, for myself, and I had to find this out myself, I was born 12:57 a.m.
Okay.
So close to 1 o'clock a.m. In this calendar, they would say, oh, you were born Monday morning. You were born early Monday morning. So then I would start calling myself Kojo or Kwajo and trying to invoke the divinity that animates the moon. But that's not the divinity that I came into the world with. Mm-hmm. I was assigned to the divinity that animates the sun in the context of the Akradim boson with the divinities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. So if I was going according to the European calendar, listening to them, I would have called myself Kwajo or Kojo. Mm-hmm. I would have been trying to invoke a lunar divinity and that lunar magnetic energy, which is, that's fine, but that's not who I am. I would have been neglecting the solar divinity and that solar fire, the divinity that animates that solar orb, because I'm listening to Europeans telling me
right.
what time the day starts.
Right.
So for me, for example, June 2nd is my, birth date, yeah. Right? But since I was born at 12:57 a.m., close to 1 a.m., the sun didn't rise until about 5 hours later. Mm-hmm. So it was really still Sunday night.
Right.
So I was really born on June 1st. Right. That's the real thing. So if your birth date doesn't align with the same day, like every year you're not going to fall on the same day.
Right.
So for me, today is June 1st as we're recording this. Friday is June 2nd, but since I was born on a Wusidar Sunday, I will wait until Sunday, the first Krada or Soul Day in my new year. That will be the day I go to the river. Today is my Awoda, or my birth date, basically. 365 and a quarter days has passed, a whole solar cycle has passed. But you don't invoke the divinity that governs your head until that divinity's day comes back around.
Right.
So that's the difference. But that's just an example of, the continuity of culture. If you see Kwasis and Kwames and Oshawas in the literature and so forth, what that means is they were engaged in Okraguare, they were pouring libation in the Akan fashion, they were teaching their children whatever they could until their children may have been taken away and so forth. If they retained something, wherever they went, they would go off, if they were taken to Alabama.
And I feel like I feel like we all have retained the practice and maybe not the information behind it of why this is something that we do, right? Right.
We retain that instinct, but then when we get quiet, those ancestresses and ancestors who were forced over here, they're the ones who will show up. They'll speak to us in the tree language at our ancestral shrine or in a dream and so forth, and they'll remind us, and then they'll put us in position to show who's who.
Yeah, like I was talking to someone and they told me that I needed to burn cedar, and when I've tried to burn sage in my house, like it always bothered me, and I didn't quite. Like the energy cleansing that is supposed to take place, I never necessarily felt that. Okay. And I was talking to someone and they were like, they gave me a reading and they said, you need to burn cedar because that's what your ancestor had to work with in Ohio. Like one of my ancestors that I guess I have a direct connection to, who's like looking over me. She worked with cedar. Okay. And so I bought cedar, and when I burned that, I feel so much more at ease. I feel so much more at peace, like not kind of like still waiting for an energetic cleansing that I had when I burned sage.
Right. And that's important because sometimes we get that information like, this is what you're supposed to do, frankincense, myrrh, sage, whatever. And people do that. And even when people try to say, well, incense comes from India, so the incense trees, the Heju, we did an article, Heju and Antiyu, the white resin and the red resin, and Asar is the divinity that governs the white resin, frankincense, and Hedaru governs the red resin, which is called Antiyu in ancient Kemet and so forth. So, sometimes people just don't have information, and they get happy about saying, well, that didn't come from Africa, but they never did the work. But the thing is, you can have things in general, but like you said, if your people say, well, yeah, people do that, but you, in our blood circle, in our specific blood circle, based on the things that we went through, the places that we had to migrate to, we had to interface with the region of the Earth Mother in Ohio, and the energy expression there is different than the energy in Alabama.
Right.
So when we interface with her there, and she says, will you use cedar? And then you incorporate that, and that affects your DNA and so forth.
Immediately it affected it. Immediately. Right. I remember the first time I burned cedar in my house. Like, again, that kind of visual connection, things just seemed brighter. The air seemed lighter and more pure.
Right.
Not the way that it kind of, I feel like there was still like something hanging over when I burned sage.
And the fact is, just like people know about animal totems, right? So in Akan, there are Achinebois, which is the animal, which is the Abois. There's a sign, Achine, which is the Achinebois, the animal totem. So say Sekhmet, who is Abinah, you have the Sekhmet tattoo, bam, on the arm and so forth. But her sacred animal totem is the Jatabere, which is the lion.
Yeah.
And people kind of know, okay, different groups have animal totems associated with their clans. But just like we have animal totems, we have plant totems.
Right.
And we also have mineral totems, and then we're the human totems. So plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, human life, we have totems, but it may be a situation where your plant totem, your matric clan, was not sage, maybe it was cedar.
Right.
And you will be neglecting a specific living entity that carries the energy of your specific clan and the divinity that governs your clan, because somebody else said in the book, hey, you're supposed to burn sage.
The same thing, like I feel such a connection to Alegua, right? And if I were to read and adhere to the information out there that says like I can't really have a connection to Alegua if I'm not making sacrifices. If like these certain things that are supposed to be the way. Like I remember doing some research on Alegua, and they were like, oh, you need to have an Alegua candle. Nobody had no candles devoted to right. It's just like all of these things you're saying that have to happen, that I know that wasn't the practice.
Right. You could
like if I feel a connection to an Orisha, if I feel a connection to a deity, like that's a genuine connection. It's not necessarily, like I don't know. So like the initiation and all of the other aspects that are supposed to take place for you to be a daughter or a follower, or like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a devotee or...
Yeah, devotee. Yeah. But no, so I feel a connection to Alegua, but if I adhere to the information that's out there, like if I haven't sacrificed the animal, if I haven't done all of these other things, then I can't be and I don't necessarily want to be a devotee, but I feel a connection to Alegua. So why can't I incorporate Alegua into my daily practice or my daily acts of life?
Right, and so this is what happens, and it's so important for us to make these distinctions over here. Because sometimes if we go somewhere, go to the continent, we go to Ghana, Nigeria, somewhere else, they'll say, well, this is what we do.
Right.
And they don't understand that once we left here, in fact, most of us left around the so-called 1700s. Before some of the traditions started getting corrupted over the next 300 years, we had already left. We were already gone. So we brought a pristine expression of the culture over here. So if somebody was captured 300 years ago and they were dropped off over here, whatever happened in the next 300 years, Christianity, and they got Hindu images and white saints and all kind of stuff in shrines and everything, we were gone for that. So the way it was practiced hundreds of years ago is what we brought over here.
Right.
So if one of those ancestresses and ancestors who were priests and priestesses in our blood circle said, hey, you need to do this, you don't say, no, I'm not going to do that because this cousin on the continent, contemporary, region of the continent said, this is the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. We had to adjust based on what was happening. If you had they do make sacrifices and all that kind of stuff, but if you were over here, you weren't able to just go grab a goat, you know what I'm saying?
Right, does that mean you no longer have a connection?
Right,
connection wasn't severed.
Right,
and because you couldn't sacrifice.
Right, and that's an animal totem, but we're the human totem for the divinities. We follow what the divinity that governs has said. Sometimes you'll have a situation where, for us, we have relatives. Some people were forced to breed with other ethnic groups. Normally, if we're on the continent, Akan people wouldn't be breeding with Yoruba people who are 1,000 miles away. You know what I'm saying? We get over here, that happens. And it's not a bad thing in the context of, that we have a pan-African, quote-unquote, blood circle. Mm-hmm. But as we say in the Akwamu nation, Akwamu mind, we have an Ebe proverb, you can mix blood, but you cannot mix the Okra the soul. So you're a spirit, you come into the world a few hundred years ago, you're living on the continent, you get snatched up and brought to North America, you fight a war of liberation and so forth, you have children that are taken away and so forth, and you die killing some crackers escaping. But when you transition, you see your children grow up in North America, they're in slavery, but then they escape and so forth. Grandchildren grow up, great-grandchildren.
And they're indoctrinated in a different type of lifestyle and culture.
Right, but you're watching them, and the ones who paid attention,
right,
they remember what their parents said. You will come to them when they're asleep, when you come to them in their dreams, you come to them, when they're going through something really tough. They may not be clairvoyant enough to see you, or maybe not hear you, but they can feel you. But some of them are clairvoyant. And they're scared because they see a spirit walking around there.
Right, oh my God. Speaking of which, I remember it was the first time I was allowed to be left at home alone. I must have been 7 or 8. And maybe 3 or 4 months prior to that, my Aunt Bibi had just transitioned. Okay. And she was this little old lady with she was very, very light. And she had this grayish blue hair. And it always stuck out to me because I'm like, why does her hair look blue? But I was sitting on the bed in my room. And I see this little old lady kind of like walk past the walkway from my door to the hallway. Mm-hmm. And immediately I knew it was Aunt Bibi. But I was so afraid that I shut her out. Like if she was there to say something to me, to deliver a message, like I wasn't able to receive it because I was so frightened because I knew that was her, but it could not have been her because she had just transitioned. Right?
But it was her.
Right. Like now I know. Years later, because I've seen other ancestors, and again, I don't identify with any particular religion, but I feel like my ancestors speak to me, and I'm a vegetarian. I've been one for 20 plus years. One of my ancestors wanted a pot roast. I don't even know how to cook a pot roast. But Trader Joe's had like the prepackaged pot roast or whatever. So I bought it and I baked it. And then like with whatever I was going to eat, I think I made string beans and I made like some sweet potatoes. And I just set it at the altar. Right. Because I'm like, this is what you want. I would never eat this, but this is what you want. So here, right? According to, I feel like, some people, I shouldn't do that. Like, why do I have an ancestral altar if I'm not identifying with a particular African religious tradition? But that's just in me to do. Right, because they don't even know what African means. These people, they read a lot of books, they memorize some stuff, or they get connected with some people who have limited information, and then they want to pontificate about, But that's like when you said about the, seeing, that was a pure experience. You're a child. You see the ancestral spirit, you know who it is, she's there, you're clairvoyant enough to see her at that moment because you're not, conditioned yet to not want to see that. Now, very often we shut that down until we become adults. Right.
A lot of people shut that down the first time it happens, or a few times they shut it down until they become adults. When they start studying things and leave Christianity alone and start studying some other stuff, then they're reminded like, oh, this is, what happened. But that was a pure experience. And that's central to ancestral religion. Ancestral communication is the institution, like going to a university. That shrine space is the university for ancestral religion. And the more we communicate with them, the more they share information and connect us with people who we need to be connected with. But that goes back to, we inherit these traditions. We don't just go and practice something. Just like a lion doesn't go to school to practice lion culture, they come into the world with it.
Yeah, they just align it.
We have a specific approach. But that's like if like she came to you. When you were that great ancestress who was watching over your descendants generation after generation after generation, and one of them was receptive like you were. So you're this great, Akwamu ancestress. And most of the people that you try to communicate with in dreams, or when they're driving, you try to tell them to turn the corner before, and then they do it, and then they almost get hit by a car, but you help them. They'll say, oh, Jesus, they'll attribute to
That's been my life. That's been my entire life. I cannot, especially being in Chicago and calling myself a knucklehead growing up. There's so many times I know there was a hand from 300 years ago snatching my butt up.
Right.
Like, no, we're not doing that.
Right, and
Stop.
then push you right on. and you paid attention. So that's the important part. Some of us pay attention to a certain extent, but we won't go all the way. But if you were that ancestress like your Aunt Bibi, and one of the people paid attention, and nobody else paid attention, but one of them paid attention, so they grow up, they get married, it's time for them to have a child, and they bring you back into the world. Now you're the same ancestress, that they used to communicate with. You used to help this young woman, when she was growing up from the time she was a baby, and now she's your mother. And then you're a child, but now she's responsible for you, the great ancestress. And when you grow up in America, you say, hey, where do we come from? And if she didn't know any better, she would say, well, we will never know where we came from because we were so mixed up on the boats that we don't have a particular identity, and we have all these different groups in our blood circle. The blood may be mixed, but the soul's not. You're the same Akwamu ancestors from 300 years ago who lived in the Akwamu nation, who had an Akan name and so forth. You have returned. You have blood mixture, but you're the same spirit, and you have the same identity, and you have the same culture. Now, you can interface with Igbo relatives and, Ewe relatives and people descended from that in North America, but as far as where you actually came from, that's based on reincarnation. It's not based on blood circle. And that's why you can instinctively, when you were a child and saw your aunt, that was like the beginning of your formal ancestral religious practice. She showed up, you never forgot that. You held it, tight until it was time for you to revisit it and say, this is part of the culture.
Right.
And sometimes you have an ancestral spirit. So, for example, if that Akwamu ancestress, you were her and you were watching everything that happened over the past 300 plus years, some of your aunts and uncles, and great aunts and great uncles were Igbo people, Yoruba people, Fang people who were incorporated. And some of them, they're trying to communicate with their direct descendants and they're not listening.
Right.
But you're the only one that listens. So you're Akan, but if you're Yoruba great aunt, it's like, listen, we used to evoke Elegba, this is what we used to do, and you feel that, you'll do it for her, and then you'll do certain things that will draw some of the other relatives to see what you're doing, and it'll force them to say, wait a minute, I need to be doing something. You're assisting her to reach her people because only a few of us are paying attention. So we get jumped by everybody. Normally it would be spread out and everybody would be communicating with their grandparents.
Right.
But since most people are not, the few that are, we get jumped by the ancestral spirits. That's it. We get the, But that, what you said about people just giving standard cookie cutter definitions, not acknowledging or even respecting the fact that black people maintain ancestral religion intact here, that kind of thing leads to corruption. So
We're taking this short break to let our viewers and listeners know about our 9 archived online Hoodoo courses. We conducted a series of 9 courses online. Some of them are 4-week courses, some of them are 6-week courses. All 9 courses are available as a special for our listeners for $50 for the entire 9-course Hoodoo set. Trustery, cosmology, ritual medicine, divination, and more. Simply go to our website, odwirafo.com, on the Okraguare page, and you can access all 9 courses. Now, back to our interview.
Now, you were telling me about what is it like when you first started saying, okay, I'm going to reclaim and start learning about my culture. Like years ago, you wanted to look into something ancestral. What is it like for a woman to say, hey, let me start looking into this. Who am I going to go and, get some information from?
I think that, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of religions, a lot of industries, a lot of information is kind of gate kept by men.
That's right.
And because that's the case, as a woman, I think as women, maybe we are attracted to people with information, with knowledge, with assumed power. And I think that there are men who can take advantage of that.
Right.
And I think that there are men who exploit that. And I just always was one, and it wasn't with respect to any African traditional religion. It was just about knowledge of self and waking up to who I was as a Black woman. And I remember going to this event in Chicago, and I really did not like how this brother was talking to me, just like I was supposed to be like one of his many. And I had to tell him, like, I ain't no nation pussy. Like, that's just what it is. Don't approach me like that. And that, I was just turned off from there. And I kind of just went inside. Like, if I found a woman who had information and who was willing to kind of talk and share with me, then I was always super open for that. But I'm also just very much a skeptic and very much an introvert. So I found reading and researching on my own is the best way. And so I do what works for me. I couldn't pass any test on Hoodoo. I couldn't pass any test on Voodoo. I couldn't pass any test on Yoruba traditions. But I've read about all of these things and just trying to figure out who I was.
Right.
And what works for me.
Right. And things shifted a little bit. Like you would notice between, say like in the 90s, when it was a resurgence of people looking at stuff Afrocentric and hip-hop artists and,
Right.
so-called conscious rappers and so forth, or, neo-soul artists and so forth. But people didn't have access to the internet yet. So you were solely dependent on that tiny fraction of people who decided to write a book about something. And then the people who were practicing, but a lot of them, like you said,
are flawed. And I mean, we're human. We're human. No one is perfect. But I feel like if you're in a position to disseminate information to people who are hungry for it, then you have an obligation not to exploit them.
Right. That's our culture.
Yeah.
And we were taught, not to question elders and eldresses. We kind of taught that to a certain extent just growing up in America. That was always true with regard to spiritually cultivated elders and eldresses. And there's a distinction, just like ancestresses and ancestors. Every tradition has different classes. You have Nsamanfo and Akan, but you have the Nananom and Nsamanfo with the spiritually cultivated Nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated class of ancestresses and ancestors. We invoke them or evoke them. We don't try to pour libation and communicate with the deceased relative who's a child molester or rapist. We let them suffer. They deserve to suffer.
Right.
There's no forgiveness for that. They deserve to suffer everything they've done. We only connect with the ones who are spiritually cultivated. And you have Mpanyinfo, which is elders, but then you have a class called the Nananom Mpanyinfo, which is the spiritually cultivated elders and eldresses. We seek counsel from them, so you don't question, quote unquote, them, but they don't mind questions.
Right.
The people mind questions.
And that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I get it. I get it. If you have information and people are hungry for it, then sometimes it can be overwhelming. If you have information but you also have bills to pay, then I get it. Like, okay, I'm gonna give you this information. You can take this course. You can sign up for this workshop, because you should be able to, especially in a capitalist society, you should be able to capitalize on your knowledge. But I think there's a fine line between capitalizing and exploiting, right?
Right. Definitely.
Like $300 for a juju bag. That's ridiculous.
Right. And you can make your own.
Right, exactly.
So now it's, there's an equalizing process. The internet is out, so there's a lot of exploitation on the internet. It just exploded, especially in the early so-called, the 13,003, 13,004 or 5, which is 2003, 4, 5, and so forth. People getting on the internet, people writing books and writing articles and making pages and websites, and people started getting on, later Instagram and so forth, and creating these pages and workshops and retreats. And people are starting to have to sift through things, and mindsets are changing. They're like, no, we're not scared of questioning. We're not going to believe anything anybody has to say. You're going to have to prove it first. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how many years you said you've been initiated. We don't give a damn about none of that, because it's meaningless. If it's not true, it's not true.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, people were scared to do that. They would join some Ile or some Abosom Fie. And primarily because, like Dr. Hazard said in our previous interview, we believe that we didn't have anything.
Right.
We believe that the Cubans maintained Lukumi, the Haitians maintained Vodou, the people in Brazil maintained Candomblé, in Guyana they have Comfa and so forth. But black people in North America, we believe that we didn't preserve our traditions.
And
so we
that's
have to
what
go to
is
everybody
so
else.
wild to me, because when you bring up ancestral worship, especially in some circles, mainly people who identify with Christianity, it's witchcraft.
Right.
But they'll show that Disney movie Coco to their children. They'll show Mulan to their children, and in both of those, there's ancestral worship taking place. So it's okay when it's another culture, but if it's us, it's witchcraft. There's something dirty to it, which it baffles the mind, but then it doesn't baffle the mind, because I understand how disconnected on purpose we are from our history and from our cultural practices.
Because that's the key. That's the only thing that the people who maintain ancestral religion, as you know, as a true historian, those are the ones who staged the major revolts that overthrew enslavement. Whether it was the Gullah Wars, so-called Seminole Wars, or Kumfo Yao, Nat Turner's Rebellion, or Kumfo Kwabena, Demarvisi, and so forth, or wherever we were at, the ones who maintained ancestral religion went into places like Dismal Swamp and were there for generations, free and independent while other people were still enslaved.
Right.
Ancestral religion was the key to have us to focus on what we should be doing, what's the best way to attack the enemy, take our people out, have the best success.
And I think that's the most important thing. Like, we, if nothing else, learn to listen to, some people say that inner voice, but those are your people looking out for you. Right. And you got to learn how to listen to that.
Exactly.
It's just as simple as that. Whether you call it your first mind or your spirit or whatever, your ancestors are always. I remember I was talking to my homegirl. There was this guy. He said that he was supposed to be at the Pentagon on 9/11.
Okay.
And I forget why he said he wasn't there, and I was like, that was your ancestors looking out for you, because something happened. I think like he had a flat tire and he had to change it, and it just threw his whole day off, so he didn't get to work on time. And I was like, oh, that was your ancestors looking out for you. And he looked at me and he was like, that was God.
That's why when we talk about
he didn't say that was God. He said that was Jesus. That's what he said. He was like, that was Jesus. Right. And I just left it alone, but I was talking to my homegirl later, and she was like, he really think Jesus for all these people in the world, like just that one person. He got everybody, just all of the time, not your ancestors who have more of a direct connection to you and a more, I don't want to say more of a vested interest, but an interest in your preservation, because you're preserving their line.
And a vehicle by which they can come back and return.
Right.
So it's a definite vested interest. But that's it goes back to we did maintain tradition. Once we know that, and every time I've talked about that or we've connected with people who are teaching that same kind of that reality, that's the one thing that opens people's minds up. They're like, finally somebody's saying that actually we did preserve something.
Right.
We're not just niggas in America didn't do anything, and everybody else in the Western Hemisphere were resilient enough to maintain their ancestral religion, but we were just kicking it on the plantation. And some of us believe that, so when we have that mindset, then we will say, we didn't preserve anything, let me go to somebody on the continent so they can give me a name, they can adopt me into their blood circle, they can do everything for me. But we already have a blood circle. If you ask you can't say you're communicating with the ancestral spirits, but then you can't find out your blood circle. They'll tell you exactly what your blood circle is. So if you can't say on one hand, I'm doing that, but on the other hand, I don't know who I am. That means you're not doing it.
I know that you know, but I feel like for people who have a hesitation of saying like I'm hoodoo, or have a hesitation of saying that they want to identify specifically with a group, right? But they have these feelings and they feel this connection. How do they open themselves up so they can hear the exact things that they're supposed to hear? And I think for novice or for people who just don't want to completely submerge themselves in this one thing, but the energy is there. Right. And their ancestors are talking and they will not be ignored any longer. How do they open themselves up to listen to that message? Because sometimes it's abstract. Sometimes it's super abstract. Like you really have to think about like, oh, this is what they mean. Because like even with the pot roast, I don't eat pot roast. I shouldn't, like me thinking about a pot roast is not because I want one. Right, so I had to make that connection. Right. Like, well, I know I don't want it, but okay. And then once I did that and I put it at my altar, I put that plate at my altar, there was no more thoughts of pot roast. right. You didn't revert back to pot roast. Right. No, but that's a good point, because it's, in fact, I was about to ask you about that whole ancestral communication piece, but before that, the first thing is it's no rush. We have this mindset of, conversion. Like, there are quote-unquote religions, and then you get converted, and you become part of this thing, and then now you follow their stuff. Europeans had to do conversion because the religions are fake. Jesus never existed, Muhammad never existed, these are cartoon characters. So they had to force somebody to embrace something. We engage in reversion, we just revert back to our original pristine state. So there's no rush. Like if you can't hear from the Nsamafo right now, okay, it's not like, okay, it's over. You have your whole lifetime. There's no urgency. It's not an exigency. So you can relax. Secondly, there's no conversion. Just like lions aren't converted into lion culture and giraffes aren't converted, they're born into that. So if they're placed in the zoo and they're walking around where the monkeys are and they just kind of acting the same, at some point the lion's going to come out. Some point. Because
that's who they are. So they were born into it. They don't have to convert into it. And once they know that, they're like, oh, it's already inside. All I have to do is bring it out. Then it's just like working out. If you establish your ancestral shrine, and then you go to, a sacred space where you block everything else out so you can focus.
And I guess that's what it is. And like there's information out there about what a shrine should consist of, but again, it's what you feel. It's what you think needs to be there, right? I guess maybe there are a couple of mandatory things, like there should be something from the earth. There should be, but
it depends on where the Maasai people living in the desert have a different kind of setup than the people in Equatorial Guinea, the Twa people in the forest. They would have sand on their shrine and different things. People in the forest don't have that. So it's based on who you are, where you're at. But like, for example, when you first establish even before that. So if you're working out, if you go to the shrine once and you communicate, and setting up a shrine is a space that is set aside for you to block everything else out. Periodic,
and it doesn't have to be in your house.
Right.
It can be in a place where you find peace. It can be in nature.
Right.
And I guess like there's that misinformation, and I don't even want to say it's misinformation. It's just like you said, there are certain things that apply to certain ethnic groups and to certain belief systems. And if you find yourself here in the wilderness of North America.
Right.
Then you have to kind of do what works for you or what feels right to you.
And your clan is still with you, so they
Right.
will show you. There's certain things we have dietary taboos because, based on where we have gone, our DNA over certain clans, certain things we eat will make us sick, but somebody else who's very similar to us, related but a little bit more distant, they can't eat that. But there's certain things that are cultural taboos based on our energetic configuration.
Right.
But if you set aside a space, the Nsamako are with you wherever you are. The reason you set aside a space is to be more focused. That's
I
just like
that.
a television is a shrine. Everybody has a shrine.
They say, so The Color Purple was a wonderful book. And one of my favorite lines in there is Suge Avery is talking to Miss Seeley and she about why she doesn't go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, people don't go to church to find God. They go to church to share God. But God is right here.
Mm-hmm.
Just look, have you ever looked at The Color Purple?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need this specific brick and mortar thing to feel like you have a connection to a higher power. Like it's in you, it's everywhere.
Right. I mean, we had temples in ancient Kemet and temples all over the continent and wherever we are, but that's just an amplification.
Right, to share, to amplify.
And it
like
doesn't-
if everyone's together and they're honoring this deity or they're sharing this experience, then it amplifies the energy.
Right.
But you also have it on your own.
Right. We use the example of a shrine being like if you have what is it? A microscope. Well, not a microscope, but if you use a magnifying glass.
Mm-hmm.
So if the sun is shining on some dry leaves outside, they're just warm. It's 80 degrees outside today.
Mm-hmm.
If you were standing out in the wooded area, you see the sun shining on the leaves. They're
Mhm.
dry. They're kind of brittle because the sun is baking them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you take a magnifying glass and put it in between the sunlight and the leaves, and you position it properly, it will magnify the energy of the sun, and you can cause them to combust because it's just a magnifying device. The output of the sun hasn't changed. You've just magnified it and particularized it in a certain space, and now the energy is magnified right there. And an ancestral shrine is a magnifying device.
And it's just made me think. I just wanted, I guess, maybe to ask for clarity for whoever may be listening. So, what if I identify more with a Yoruba tradition? Like, yes, I'm an African American or a Black American here in North America, but Akan isn't what I'm drawn to.
Right.
Maybe I'm drawn to Yoruba.
Right.
Maybe I am drawn to Voodoo. Maybe I am drawn to something else. Like, what does that mean?
So
Because
that's
I
like,
know people, like I know young people, and I don't know if it's because, Beyonce and
right, that's what it is.
it's in
Some of it
vogue
is.
now, but
Mhm.
but the Yoruba tradition is what you hear about mostly in
Right.
modern media,
Right.
right? So if you feel a connection to that, what does that mean? Like,
So that's like, and they're the most populous, ethnic group on the continent. So it kind of follows, there were a large percentage of them brought here. Just like it was a large percentage of Akan, but there's more Yoruba people, depending on where you are. So of course, it's a little bit more prominent, even though some people made it more popular, like Yana Van Zandt and other people. She wrote a book, Tapping the Power Within, back in the 90s, and that became super popular. So, like with our film, we have a film, Amadu Kafo Adibisa, African American Ancestral Divination. And we talk about different traditions. So just like Akan people, when we were forced over here, we continued practicing Akan ancestral religion. We use the Akan term Undu, which is Hoodoo. If a Yoruba person and an Akan person were on the same boat, right? And they were dropped off in North Carolina, and the Akan person went to, forced into a plantation, they will be practicing Undu, which is medicine, and we just utilize the term Undu for the whole Akan tradition. But the Yoruba person, the term Ju means to cast in Yoruba, like to cast medicine and cast and throw and so forth. The term Ju is reduplicated to Juju. So they started calling their tradition Juju. So when you hear about a Juju man or a Juju woman in North America, what they were originally saying is, I'm a Yoruba man, I'm a Yoruba woman. If you heard somebody say, that's a Hoodoo man or Hoodoo woman, they were saying, I'm a Akan. If you heard someone say, that's a voodoo man or voodoo woman, they were saying, I'm from the Ewe ethnic group.
Okay.
If they said, I'm a Wanga man and I'm throwing the Wanga, like you see in, South Carolina and Florida and so forth, and you see on old magazines, they'll say, this is a Wanga woman and she's taking the Wanga, throwing the Wanga. Wanga is an Ovambo term. The people in Namibia and Angola and so forth. So Wanga became known as the terms that were the most poignant with regard to medicine and killing the enemy. They'll say Wanga means witchcraft, they say Undu or Hoodoo means witchcraft, and Voodoo means witchcraft, and Juju means witchcraft. The most powerful expression in the Western Hemisphere, the stuff that got us free, that healed us internally,
Right.
but also helped us kill the so-called slave master and free ourselves, was the medicine. So we call the whole tradition medicine. Instead of saying, I'm practicing Akan tradition, we said I'm practicing Undu, which is
Right.
Hoodoo. Instead of a Yoruba saying, I'm practicing Yoruba religion, they said I'm practicing Juju, the medicine that helped us free ourselves. And the Ovambo people said, instead of saying, I'm an Ovambo man, sometimes they would say I'm a Wanga man, a Wanga woman. So if you're naturally drawn to Yoruba tradition, in North America, that's the Juju tradition. So you will be looking to Juju men and Juju women who still maintain that tradition.
And so
Not
are you
going to
saying-
Cuba or going to
Right, that's what I was
Nigeria.
gonna say. Are you saying you don't necessarily need to go to Nigeria to form that connection? Like that connection is here. You just need to look for someone who's a Juju man or a Juju
Right,
woman.
and your Juju ancestresses and ancestors will put you in contact with whoever you need to connect with, because a lot of people don't practice anymore. They became Christians and Muslims and so forth. But yeah, it's just like somebody, for example, in Cuba, their first thought would not be, okay, I'm Yoruba, I have Yoruba ancestry, they're going to practice the Lukumi expression. Their first thought is not, I have to go to Nigeria or I can't practice ancestral religion. For hundreds of years, they continue to practice the Lukumi tradition. Somebody in Haiti, the ones who are practicing the real tradition in Haiti, not the ones who are selling nonsense and pretending like it's the tradition, just making money off of people, but the ones who practice the real tradition, they don't say, I have to go to Togo and Benin or else I can't. They've been practicing the tradition the whole time.
Right,
And people in Brazil, they don't say, I have to go to Nigeria. They're like, I'm practicing Candomblé.
right.
We're the only ones who think we have to go somewhere. So, but once we find out that we don't, Juju, which is the Yoruba tradition, has been maintained in North America for 300 years. Just like the Lukumi tradition has been maintained. Same thing with the Wanga. So even if we go connect with our cousins on the
And there's
continent,
nothing wrong with that.
that's diplomatic relations.
Right.
But when you know who you are and you go connect, these your brothers, sisters, your cousins.
Because
Literally.
like you said, the information is a bit different, the necessity is a bit different, the tools of the trade are a bit different because you're here in
Right.
America.
Right. You have, for example, Dr. Hazard has in her book, she has an image of
That's an excellent book, by the way.
that Mojo working book, an image of possum bones. They use possum bones for divination. There aren't any possums in Ghana.
Right.
So when they showed us, well, this particular animal in this region of the Earth Mother's body, this animal is governed by this divinity, so you can use the bones for this animal because it's governed by this abosom, and we can show you how to use it. No Akan person from Ghana can come over here and teach or initiate them into possum bone
Right.
divination. We can initiate them into it, but they can't initiate us into
Right.
it. We got that directly from the deities, Yabosom and Smartphone. And it's the same thing. We have a locative identity, as we say, based on the region of the Earth Mother that we interface with, the plant life, animal life, mineral life that we incorporated and made up our cells as we, developed and gave birth and so forth, and the unique expression of the deities as they manifested in this region. We forged a locative identity, and then we blended ancestral blood circles, so our expression of Akan expression, or if somebody's Yoruba and so forth, it's also Akan person in North America, a Yoruba person in North America, meaning a Yoruba person in this region of the Earth Mother's body. They have echinacea over here, we might need that, they inhabit over there. We came here with everything that they have genetically
Right.
and culturally, but then when we interface with this region, what happens when it's snowing? Where you get your medicine from then?
Right.
We have to figure out how to get some medicine to keep ourselves going and how to survive to eat. If we escaped and then in the summertime, we got here in the summer, 90 degrees, South Carolina. We escaped into the forest, we saw some clearings, we set up an independent, settlement, maroon settlement, we're growing food and so forth, like Dismal Swamp. And then something happened that we never seen before. All of a sudden, all the leaves start falling off all the trees. It starts getting dark.
Right.
And some white stuff starts falling from the sky and just piles up. And we feel this feeling we never felt before, which is cold. Now what do?
Right.
You got to figure out medicine from these plants we never seen before. Some of them are familiar, some of them aren't. That's our unique expression. The Unsamanfo and the Abosom in this region show us what's up, and we incorporate it. She's giving me the the wrap up signal. No, but yeah, I was just thinking of this. Okay. So, any closing?
No.
You like? That's it.
No.
No, but that's oh, when you talked about the, I just wanted to ask you. So when you talked about how do you start and so forth, and you gave the answer. What was your experience? Just like you talked about the experience with the soul washing. The first time you like formally set up an ancestral shrine.
So I think I went down a rabbit hole. Like there were certain things that my spirit or my ancestors, one in particular, Dorothea, that is her name.
Okay.
I found that out via a reading. There are certain things that she wanted, which was the cedar.
Okay.
Right? And immediately I felt so different burning it, like I said earlier. But just trusting what I was hearing, or trusting the information that was coming to me, and not feeling like I'm going crazy or I'm making it up.
Right.
And I think that's an important part. And again, because we've been so brainwashed here to think that something otherworldly is witchcraft, or something that we can't necessarily understand and explain is witchcraft. It takes time to trust yourself to understand that no, this is real. These are your ancestors speaking to you, and you need to listen to them.
Right.
So getting over that, like I said, I feel like I'm naturally a skeptic. So getting over that to the point where I'm trusting in the energy that I'm getting, the information that I'm receiving. And once I set up my shrine, like in a reading, I was told that Dorothea was a water scryer and that she wanted a bowl of water. And for me, like, she wants to impart that information onto me, to the art of like water scrying. And I still haven't trusted myself enough to sit down in front of a bowl of water to try it, right? But I'm honoring her by having that bowl of water. I'm honoring her. Apparently Dorothea may have been vain because she likes mirrors. So I have a mirror on her altar, right? And immediately, like when I clean the mirror or when I refill the water or anything, like it just feels like there's a light over there. There's a light over the altar on some, thank you, about time. Right? If I ignore those things for a couple of days, like the energy in the house will change. So it's definitely there, and it's definitely present, and it's definitely something that I pay attention to.
And the fact that the whole mirror thing, like whether it's Heteru, her expression in Kemet, or Oshun in Yoruba, or Afia in Akan, that's the mirror as a sacred implement for her. So she may have been a daughter of that divinity.
Yeah.
But that's it's like when you going to work out. If you work out one day, then take a few days off, work out another day, take 3 days off, then you'll feel some strength. You're doing better than you were doing before. But if you work out every single day, or 6 days a week or whatever, you're going to develop that strength on a consistent basis. It's going to be, measurable. The more consistent you are with going to the Ancestral Shrine in Okraguare, the more receptive you become. You're tuning up your receptors.
Right.
And again, it's not a rush. So sometimes the way things are put forward in, social media or online and stuff, it's like an urgency. You have to do this, and this. you can go follow what your cry is directing you to do.
And that really is what it is, because like I said, if you put a piece of paper in front of me and you wanted to test me on any African traditional religion, like I can only speak for what my spirits, what my ancestors have said to me, and what they said I need to be doing, and how I need to be living my life. And ultimately, I want to be a person of moral standing who honors them, right? In everything that I do.
Right.
So, like I can't join any houses. I'm not gonna have a godfather, a godmother, and god sisters. Like that's just.
And normally, see, part of it is that inclination is normally we don't join anything because it was already part of our family anyway. So the idea of, hey, if you want to practice a tradition, you join a house, you get a godmother, godfather, that's a brand new thing that was created over here. But normally, it's your grandmother, everybody in your family is practicing the tradition.
Right.
There's certain elders and eldresses who are priests and priestesses, some of them are counselors and so forth, some of them are medicine people. It's all within your blood circle, so it's no such thing as joining something.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, I'm gonna sit at the foot of anyone with any information, anyone who is wise and they feel authentic to me. Like, that's just what it is, and I feel like that's why you and I have connected, because the information you have, you are so passionate about it and so knowledgeable, and it feels real to me. It doesn't feel like it's, you're doing it for more followers or for clout or for money. Like, this is you, and you want as many people to have this information as possible. Like, that's your mission.
Right. And that's why we put the books out for free and everything. But you'll find out that when some folk put us in crossing paths, then you look back further and you look on, a genealogical chart and you find out we'll probably find out we're related and so forth. But that's how these new bonds get created. So normally we wouldn't be joining anything. We come over here, we have to make modifications. So it goes back to the shrine, and then let them direct you to who you need to connect with, as opposed to somebody saying,
and I
hey,
feel
I'm
like
this,
that's
this,
how
and
it's
this.
always been.
Right.
Like, if I've been struggling with something, a person is put in front of me to help me through that struggle, or to provide the information I need to get to the next level.
Right.
That's how it's always been.
And that's them putting their signature on every event. And then when you look back, you cleanse your head on a weekly basis, and you look back over the past week to see how they've been operant within your life. That's one of the reasons to take that time out to see what has happened in the past cycle, and then prepare you for the next cycle. So
I will say, since I've been doing the soul washing, which has been about 4 years, I feel so much more at peace and at ease. Like, it just kind of sets the intention for the next 365 and a half days.
Right. Important. Okay. But I just want to say, appreciate you for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.
We will put the information out for, they have a fundraiser for certain things for the documentary.
Yeah, we're in the editing process now.
Okay.
May have to do a couple of reshoots, but yeah.
Okay. So that should be coming out, late this year possibly? More than likely.
TBD.
Right. But most of it was shot. There's a lot of stuff that's already been done. So if you have to do a few reshoots, but a lot of it is complete. So it's very close to completion. But it's takes a village, trauma triggered and truth.
Trauma triggered truth.
Trauma triggered truth.
Yeah.
So we'll put the link for that. And of course, join our Patreon community, the Hoodoo Cast Patreon community. You have access to exclusive content, early drops, our online classes. We have 38 online classes that we've conducted and so forth. You'll have access to many of those archives, as well as, of course, certain Zoom calls that we do just with the Patreon community. So, once again, yet I say for everyone tuning in to the Hoodoo Cast, I'm Odwirafo Kwesi Akan, and Yebesha Bio. We will meet again.
Yerase, we thank you for tuning in to our podcast. See our website at hoodoocast.com to download our 31 books and access our 38 online courses. See our Hoodoo Cast Patreon community for all exclusive content. and also use our HoodooCast hashtag on all social media platforms. Yebeshia.